Hey there, I'm Sarah Hodges, and this is Executives Uncut, the podcast where we provide solutions for the corporate cycle of hell. Today, we're talking about uncovering truth, and I'm here with my old friend, Dr. Dan Ratner. Dan, thank you so much for joining me on this podcast. I cannot wait to share with everyone your wisdom and all about how we met. This is going to be awesome.
Well, thank you for having me, Sarah. And I feel like this is like when we would go to lunch back in New York. We
So
are
fun.
literally the only people who met on Twitter.
We met on
Like,
Twitter.
who meets on Twitter?
It's 1,000 times creepier than even meeting on Craigslist.
It
Like,
is. It is.
I just feel like it's who has done that? Who's been like,
I mean,
we met 5
I
seconds
didn't
ago.
I didn't take such a risk, but you're a woman. You met a strange man. And look, I think it came because I tend to be a nice guy. We're Midwesterners, we a lot of shared values.
Right.
It was
But
safer than
still,
you might have thought.
it
Don't
was
be too
safe.
worried for Sarah.
I felt I trusted my instinct, right? And we were meeting in a public place, for lunch. You weren't a weirdo. You were like married with kids. You were just talking about professional, stuff and ways in which we overlapped in our belief system. And then we became really good friends. And I'm amazed at how our lives have been so parallel ever since. I mean, I remember like those early conversations, even when you shared with me about your dad dying of cancer, and then a couple weeks later, my brother was diagnosed with the exact same cancer, and then unfortunately died with little boys. Like that's a really sad way to start our podcast, but even so, it was almost like the universe was preparing me emotionally or mentally for the fact that that was a possibility, and you gave me the gift of being able to see that really early on, which I'm very grateful for, even though it's kind of a weird thing to be grateful for. You
No,
know?
well, listen, I of all people know what you mean.
Mhm.
I connect, and this is something we might actually we'll talk about because you're looking for tips on what people can do to empower themselves and for coaching. And I do think that one of the things that you need to do, I'm diving into the deep end on this, but I'm just thinking one of the things that I've needed to do, certainly in my work as a therapist, is to know myself and to know
100%.
what it is that I value. And that's why when I met you, it was a no-brainer. I already knew, oh, here's a person that I can connect with deeply. And you and I just were like just talking and talking and talking.
It was
And then when that
awesome.
thing happened with your brother, I think we were both kind of blown away by, whoa, that's a that's a crazy connection. And I
Yeah.
don't even though some people could say, oh, that's like a morbid way of being connected. First of all, we were already connected by that point.
Right.
But but then secondly, I just think it increased the depth of our connection. I know what one thing that I just wanted to share with people who are watching is you and I have this funny connection where we could not talk for a long time. And we in some ways we don't even know each other that well. But in
You
like that like center point depth of who we are, we know each other very well. Like if I
yeah.
needed somebody to support me during a very hard time, I would probably go to you before some of the people I see much more often. It's
It's
because of the nature of the connection.
yeah, I feel the same way when two people are they're just both made of the same stuff. It's like finding someone from your alien planet, you know? It's kind of what
Yeah,
it
yeah.
even to the
That's
point where
funny
we were
because
both go
when I
ahead.
first came on and I was all stretched out and looked like an
You
alien,
you were. You
we
had some
figured it
technical
out.
issues. You were doing we did. But I just want to say too, like one more thing. Even the parallels that we've been on, like where we both moved from New York City to the Midwest, which almost nobody does, and we both did it. We both closed on our house. We both moved to our hometowns and closed on our houses within one day of each other. Like so weird,
That
and
was
we didn't even know that was
crazy.
happening until we randomly talked to each other like a day before it happened.
That's classic us.
So yeah, so classic us. But I want to share with everyone some of the content that you bring because you do incredible work with healing physical pain in the body through thought. Can you tell our viewers a little bit more about that and just set the stage about what you do?
I can tell you a lot about that. You're gonna have
Okay,
to rein
well,
me in
Dan.
on this one, Sarah. But
Go for it. I'll
don't
try.
worry, I'll keep it. So, First of all, the way I discovered this, I was a therapist for years before this, but I developed severe back pain, and Sarah and I met after all of this. But I had 8 years of chronic back pain every day, excruciating pain. I was taking lots of Advil. That was the only time I could get relief. And I went through, doctors and physical therapists and acupuncturists and chiropractors and so pain sufferers out there. One of the reasons they like coming to me is they know that I get it because I have been through it.
Right.
But one of the things that I discovered, and it had been suggested to me, and not in a way that I liked, by the way. People would say, "Oh, it's in your head." It
Mm-hmm.
is not in your head. It could be that your head is part of the solution, but your head is not the problem, and it's not the place where it resides. It's really happening in your body. So what I found out, and actually I should give credit to the chiropractor I was working with. He at one point said, "You know what? You should read this book by this guy, Dr. John Sarno." And Dr. Sarno, he wrote 4 books. He was an MD. He passed away a couple of years ago at I think he was 94 years old.
Wow.
But he impacted so many people. And one of the things that he did, and we're talking about uncovering truth.
Mm-hmm.
So Sarno was the kind of practitioner who was not okay with things not making sense. He was like, it's part of my job to figure this out. He was treating pain patients and they weren't getting better. But what he found is, as he talked to them about their emotional worlds, they started getting better. And he was like, how is that possible?
Yeah.
You have a herniated disc. That's the problem. So what he started doing is looking more into this, and he found that there really was this correlation between emotional life and the ups and downs of these symptoms. Then something also happened during his career, and maybe in part because of him. People started studying asymptomatic people with no symptoms whatsoever.
Mm-hmm.
They would take these images and they were train wrecks. The images were completely, they showed deterioration of all kinds. And so what we've come to see is that herniated discs do not cause back pain.
Interesting.
There's so many of these structural ideas that do not cause pain. Bone on bone things don't actually cause pain. I understand why people think logically they might. It sounds like they
Mm-hmm.
would. I totally get it. But study after study after study shows that actually there's different kinds of studies. There's some studies that show that these structural issues don't cause pain. Then there are some studies that show that emotional factors do cause things. There is a study, it's called the ACE study, the Adverse Childhood Experiences Study. And it shows that people who have had traumas of various kind, we're talking death of a parent, like I had, abuse in the home, drug use, witnessing violence, these factors led to all kinds of major health conditions. And that included a higher risk for cancer, heart disease, all kinds of things that you wouldn't think would be.
Mm-hmm.
The interesting thing is now I would think that because I know the impact of emotional life on us. So to make a long story short, even though I've already made it long, is I read this book and I started applying these thoughts, and within about 3 weeks, I started to really get better, and I started to believe, okay, maybe this can actually work. And the more I believed it, the better it became. And I want to make one distinguishing point, and then I'll turn it right back over to you.
Okay.
We're not talking about a placebo reaction. When people hear this, they think, oh, okay, you had a placebo reaction. There's a difference. You can have a placebo reaction that changes your physiology from your belief system. This is a changed belief system leading to changes in the body, but it's not a placebo. It's correct.
Mm-hmm.
It's a scientific fact. It's backed up by science. It's backed up by logic. And in my case, it's backed up by experience. So long answer.
Yes. Well, no,
Go
it's
ahead.
beautiful. I mean, I think it's great that you gave us a little bit more background because really, when you and I met, that was the catalyst. As I said, thoughts affect your physiology, and you were like, "Oh my god, nobody else gets this. Yes, we have to meet."
Yeah.
And then we just geeked out, and we talked about, we kind of like debated about how, do you need to change biomechanics to improve your physiology? And but you can improve so much of it. You can heal yourself by shifts in your thought, by dealing with that trauma. But that's really complicated. That's why you need a professional like you to help walk you through it. Can you talk to us a little bit about what that looks like when you're working with a patient? How do you help them?
Uh, Yeah, no, it's interesting too because, I've been through a whole evolution of how I work with people even since we met. Even in the last number of years, I have actually shifted over to more of a short-term consultation mindset. And this is partly because I want to help more people, but it's
Mhm.
also partly because I was finding I actually was helping people very quickly. And then they'd be like, okay, now we'll work on therapy. And I was like, well, this is interesting because I'm not sure I want to do therapy that much
Mm.
anymore because I can do this other way of helping. It was so much. It was so much more engaging for me and such a powerful thing. It's even changed the way I do my therapy.
Wow.
So now here's what I do now. In a short-term consultation, well, let me start by saying this actually. And this I'm giving tips before we even get to the tips section of this. But if you want to solve a problem, you need to understand the problem. You won't be able to address a problem if you don't understand the problem. So the nature of these short-term consultations is to come to understand the problem, which then gives me a chance to help them map out a plan of what to do. Now I know what to do. I have a PDF of action steps, and they're mostly mental action steps. And it's like 140 things that I do
Wow.
on a fairly regular basis. Maybe not every day, but they are the things that I do to address these problems. And I can, I send the PDF to people. People have gotten better just from the PDFs for me. But the way these consultations work, um, they're 4 sessions long. Occasionally we need a fifth or a sixth. That does happen. Sometimes people feel like they got what they needed in 2. But when I meet with people, we do what I call a mind body map. And essentially, what I want to do is get it on paper. We're basically taking notes on how this stuff all works. And so here's the thing. When you and I first met, I was very focused on uh, what Sarno had taught us to be focused on, which is your emotional life causes changes in your physiology.
Mhm.
Now, what I found as I worked at it is that Sarno is fantastic. He changed my life more than any other individual, probably other than my mom, I would say. Um, but at the same time, he wasn't a therapist, and it was a fairly new field then. It still is new in some ways. So here's what I discovered. My level of confidence in the diagnosis was incredibly key to my actual symptoms. So
Mm.
what I found is if I was doubting whether it was actually a structural issue, or if I was doubting whether I could get better from this, or even if I was doubting myself
Mhm.
and my capacity to get better, the fear would go up, the fight or flight response would go up, the whole body would go haywire. But if I bring that down, that's what really can help. So that this is why my podcast, which we'll talk about, I'm sure as we go, is
Yeah.
called Crushing Doubt.
Mm.
Crushing doubt has the double meaning. It has the double meaning of the thing you feel when you're in the physical symptoms is it's actually crushing and you're
Mm.
filled with doubt and you have no idea what's going on. But the solution involves science and logic coming in and crushing the doubt. So in the consultation, I will help people identify their key emotional factors that lead to symptoms,
Mhm.
and I help them get that articulated. A lot of times they'll say, "Well, I get upset when people mistreat me." That's too general. We want to get much more specific than that. Okay,
Mm.
what are the ways that you get mistreated that you're particularly upset about? What does it mirror in your life so that you can pinpoint it? Because once you know that, you can disable the mind body mechanism.
Yes.
So really actually in the first session, the emotions are the key thing I focus on. In the second session, it's doubts. A lot of times people don't realize they're doubting things, and I
Mhm.
help get that articulated. Now, the third
That's
session you're particularly going to love. Go ahead. What were you going to ask me
Oh,
after that?
I was just gonna say in those first 2 sessions, like, it sounds like that's where you're uncovering the truth, the truth of what's really happening here. How am I doubting what's happening here? But I interrupted you too early. Now I wanna know what's happening in the 3rd session.
Well, you're going to particularly love this because this is
Cool,
perfect for coaching.
cool.
So, as I went, I found there was another factor. And this was the factor that came into play mostly when I'd work with people and I'd help them with their emotions and I'd even bring down their doubt, but then they would stay at a plateau. And the plateaus are what taught me. It's funny, every problem I've encountered has led to an insight. And so one of the problems that led to a big insight was, well, what happens when people plateau?
Mm,
Let's say they bring their pain down to, just subjective numbers, let's say a 4 or a 3. And they're like, "But
yeah.
I can't get past it. I've identified the emotions. I don't think that's what's going on. I really don't have doubt about this." Okay, so what I developed is there's another these are organized in columns as I do the mind body map. There's the emotions column, the doubt column, and then there's something I call the power column. The
Mm,
power column, though, is first of all, I should say this. A lot of times people want to choose a different word. They want to choose strength. They want to choose confidence. It doesn't matter what word you choose. Power is the word I chose. There is a reason I think power is useful, though. And so, what the power column is it's about your relationship with yourself, your relationship with others, and your relationship with your symptoms.
oh, nice.
So we're uncovering, do you feel powerful in those times, or do you feel like, no, it's the other people who have the ability to judge me or to tell me what should be, or my symptoms are the ones who are in charge, or actually I didn't
Mm,
realize it, but I don't have a great relationship with myself. So it's crazy the amount of insight you can get in these targeted sessions, and that's the first 3 sessions. The fourth session is I call the action steps. I go to each column and each situation and I say, how do we address this? Now, there's usually some work afterwards, a couple emails exchanged, maybe another session. But I
mhm.
find that people come out of these knowing what the problem is, which is great because in general, people come to me baffled. They have no
Mm,
idea, just like I was.
yeah. Wow, that's fascinating, and I love how you really have organized it. And I remember you talking to me about trying to get a shorter term treatment plan in place for pain patients, and it's really cool now to hear on the flip side that you kinda it sounds like you've ironed out all the kinks and have found a replicable method that's working really well, and it's cool for me to hear too because it sounds like a process, again, to our topic today of uncovering truth, like what's
Yep.
really the matter at hand. The doubts are kind of how are you resisting what's really at hand? How can you work with it? And then how can you make that actionable and put something in place so you can move out of it? Am I getting that?
Are you completely getting it? Absolutely. Yeah.
A plus, Sarah.
Uh, yes. You're a very good listener. This is one of the reasons we're friends.
Well, that's also why I'm a coach.
That's
Uh,
also true. I'm sure that makes you an excellent coach. I mean, really, if you weren't listening well, if either of us didn't listen well, uh, we wouldn't be doing very well, which is interesting because we came here and we're both talking, but we're also listening.
yes, exactly. Well, and so I'm wondering, as you apply this kind of lens, this treatment to let's talk about organizations and the executive level, okay? What do you think executives who are listening, besides just applying it to their own lives and their own pain and hopefully reaching out to you for treatment if they're struggling, but how could they apply it to the more macro approach that they take to life and to their organizations?
Well, this is interesting. I'm going to give my opinion, but you're the coaching expert here, so I'm going to see how this applies. I
Let's
think
do
I'm
it.
right about it. But
Okay.
and I've worked with organizations also, and so I do have some expertise in it. But see, I think each one of those columns that I talked about applies to an executive. See, I think one of the things that must be hardest. I mean, I've run my own businesses and things like that, so I have some sense of that. But if you're an executive and you're dealing with a larger organization, or you're supervising lots of people, or you're in charge of lots of people, your belief system is going to determine a lot about how
Mhm.
you interact with them. And that's going to determine a lot about what then happens. So, all of these things that I give to people apply to these situations too. I'll give you some examples. I'm going to give you an example from each one. So,
Sure.
from the emotions column,
Mhm.
I think that an executive who knows themselves is going to be much better off than one that doesn't. Now, I
Sure.
don't mean you have to go to a monastery and meditate for a year, but to take some time to think about what makes me tick. What is my what are my core values?
Yeah.
And am I walking the walk? Because
Mhm.
people will respond to leaders who do who walk the walk. As a therapist, I can tell patients how to do certain things, but if I'm not living that way and they don't get to see that at all, that's actually problematic. So one of the things I've started doing as a therapist that's different after this revelation about physiology and the mind is I've started sharing more because they need to know my pain story, but they need to know me in general. They need to know
Yeah.
that I walk the walk of what I say. So
Mhm.
that's the emotions side of things. On the doubt side of things, I think to be an effective executive, you have to have you have to have confidence, but it can't be fake confidence.
Mhm.
This is the thing I say to people about doubt. I'm not telling you have no doubt. That doesn't make sense. You're going to have doubts. Let in the doubt, square it up, look at the truth of it. And then you work to kind of wrestle it to the ground and get it to a place where you're like, now I know why I think what I think. To go through a doubt process is to get to a better place with yourself about what you really think about things.
Yeah, that makes sense.
When it comes to power, um, you know, this one applies maybe the most directly. There are executives, I think, who feel that they want to be powerful and they're trying to enact power, but they don't feel powerful inside themselves.
Yes.
That's the key.
I
What do
see
you
that a
think?
lot. Yeah, I see that a lot. It's kind of that imposter syndrome manifesting itself,
Mm.
and so they put up this like facade, and that's kind of what this podcast is meant to break down, is that facade of like I am powerful and I am confident that really comes across as unapproachable authoritarianism, you know.
Right,
And you're
right.
talking about authentic power within. And something that came up for me while you were talking is that if you even look at an organization as a whole and not just an executive, it sounds like any blind spot is likely to have a corresponding pain point. And by illuminating that blind spot, by crushing the doubt, by understanding the truth of it and how it's affecting the organization, you'll be able to alleviate the corresponding pain point within the organization. And I think it's kind of cool to apply what you're saying and zoom out like that.
I think that's a great insight and it's right on, and really when it comes down to it, you will solve a problem better if you let in the fullness of it.
Yeah.
I mean,
And that's
even
really
people.
uncovering truth, right? If you let in the fullness of the
Abs-
problem. eh,
Absolutely. I mean, you see this sometimes with people who struggle with certain things like everybody's got different kinds of personalities, but there are people who are like on the autism spectrum who figure out, okay, this is not a strong suit of mine. So I'm going to lay it out there. I'm going to be vulnerable, share what's really going on. It almost doesn't matter as much who you are. It matters whether you're being who you are.
yeah, that's yeah, if you're if you're really resonating with your authentic sense of self.
Right. Because
Mhm.
if you have things that you're not as good with, I'll give you an example. I mean, I I would say that some people could say that I am sensitive. Now, what do I mean by that? I'm not sensitive all the time, but I'm somebody who can have a little thing that happens and get really going in my head about it. I need to know that about myself, and it's better if I tell people that, but not in an apologetic way. That's
Mhm.
just a part of who I am.
Yeah.
I mean, I wouldn't have ended up being a therapist if I weren't like that. Then there are people who are they're like, "No, I don't get into that sensitive stuff." But then they might need to recognize, "Okay, well, how do I affect other people?" So
Mhm.
that's the thing you wanna watch for is
Yeah.
how does who I am get enacted? Go ahead.
Well, I was just gonna say, I mean, this is just another point of overlap that we've had. We've had so many points of overlap, in all of our conversations. But the first, the first part of our A+ method is acceptance, and what you just described was beautiful, true, real, authentic acceptance of this is who I am. And for better or worse, I know this about myself, and it may be something that you want to improve over time. I'm not saying that you should or should not. That's up to the individual. But I accept this. And I think that acceptance really is the first step of uncovering truth because it allows you to take off it makes you feel courageous enough to look at the truth. Does that make sense? Like I
I
can do this because I can accept it
yeah.
and I'm not going to judge myself for it. I'm not going to judge, just going to roll with it. It's like the first step of growth.
Yeah, and it's interesting because I think that acceptance is kind of a misunderstood term, although I think all terms are kind of misunderstood. When you look deeper at them, you're like, "Oh, okay, I wasn't fully getting that."
So true.
Sometimes people think of acceptance as, "I will allow it to be real."
Hmm.
But that's part of the equation. The other part of acceptance is to see why you don't have to be ashamed of it.
Right.
You don't have to blame yourself for it. You don't have to find another person to blame for it. It
Yeah.
can that's truly letting it be,
Yeah.
is to say, "Okay, it's okay. I feel this way, and I don't need to question it." And I think
Absolutely.
when you're in that place resonating with yourself, you become a very inspiring leader. People are
Yes.
very drawn to that.
I 100% agree. Yeah, because there's nothing that really triggers you. You kind of know, well, this is what it is, and now what? There's no this is what it
Mhm.
is, and it's your fault, and it's my fault, and blah blah blah. The
Yeah.
resistance leaves, and you work with what you have, and ultimately, I think that's kind of what you're saying, and that's uncovering truth.
Yeah, I mean, I even think you know how people often have the, "I'm sorry, but"
Yes, I hate
it's
that.
not an apology. It's not an
Mom, you
apology.
do
So right.
that.
So, actually, though, really, when I apologize, I try to not bring my side of it in, even if my side of it has a good point. I'm like, "That's for them. That's for
Yeah,
them to see or not.
right.
I will acknowledge what I see and what I did."
Now I
And
feel bad
I
calling out
think
my
it
mom.
does. What's that?
So now I feel bad calling out my mom.
Hey,
'Cause I said, "Mom, you do that." But people do. That's a natural, it's a very common human response. "Well, I'm sorry, but" so many people do that. And so I'm glad that you
right.
mentioned that. I think that it prevents you from fully accepting, "Here's how I contributed to the problem," or "Here's where I screwed up."
Well, and, again, I know you were gonna ask me for tips, and I just keep getting right to them. I can't help it. I'm
I
running
think
ahead.
that you've given us plenty of tips for the day. I don't think we need you to make up 3 tips on the spot when you've already given us, like, 20.
Right, well, I could probably make up more, but the,
Good.
I think being willing to be vulnerable
Mhm.
is a key thing. It even goes back to how you and I formed our relationship.
Yeah.
There is a vulnerability on Twitter to admit you feel something or you feel drawn to a person. I don't remember how we even talked about it first, but we were both pretty excited about who the other person was saying we were.
Yeah.
And I think I even said to you, like, I don't find people on Twitter like this. What, this is crazy. I don't remember who suggested we meet up first, but there was
I don't either.
vulnerability to it.
Yeah, and I think
And
what's cool is that when we showed up, you were who you said you were. And I hope you felt the same way about me, you
oh,
know?
for sure. Absolutely.
Yeah,
But here's the thing, I knew you were gonna be you.
cool.
I just because you brought that authenticity and that vulnerability. That's a very powerful thing that you can bring to people right away. You're not gonna get a good response from everybody.
Mhm.
But if you don't get a good response from that, I find it's a great way to weed out people in your life who aren't gonna
Yeah.
be on your path.
Mhm.
Go ahead and be you.
Yes. I love it. Oh my gosh, Dan, obviously, I knew this was gonna be a long podcast because you and I could talk for ages. Um,
Yeah.
but if you don't mind, I do have a coaching challenge for this week from our end. Is it okay if I take a second and tell our audience?
Yes, please do.
Cool. So to everyone out there listening, this week, pay attention to where there's friction in your life. You know, maybe a blind spot that you don't want to acknowledge, or something that disrupts your sense of peace. And ask yourself, how would I show up differently if I fully accepted the situation without any judgment and just accepted it for what it is? That is the first step toward uncovering truth and solving your problem. Dan, would you add anything to that? Feel free.
I mean, I just there's a lot of wisdom in that.
Thank
I guess
you.
the only thing I would add to that is, or just piggyback on, is that people are often afraid of the points of friction in
Mhm.
their lives, but those are the points where you learn.
Totally.
I'm not saying I love to exist in friction. I don't. And it can be uncomfortable, the growth that happens, but I really like the idea of paying attention to it. And viewing it as something you learn from. It's the same thing I do with the body. If I have a
Mm,
symptom, it's not like I like having symptoms, but it's a communication
right.
from my body to me. And so the key is always listening. So if you're listening to the friction or a bodily experience or an interaction or something within yourself, if something feels bad inside you, there's something to that. You need to honor that. So
Yes.
I guess I did have a lot to add. That's
No, that was great. Thanks for you just leveled up the wisdom of it. So it's, I'm totally will take it. So Dan, thank you so much. I can't believe that we're out of time. Where can our viewers and listeners find out more about you? Because I know they're going to want to know.
Yep. Well, I appreciate you sending them my way. My podcast, Crushing Doubt, is on YouTube. So if you just go to YouTube, search Crushing Doubt, or with Dr. Dan Ratner, or just Dr. Dan Ratner, these things will come up. We have a website also, www.crushingdoubt.org. And
Cool.
on that website, and this is coming soon, I'm going to be having seminars that people
Hi.
can, because I wanted to develop a system where I could see people at different levels who could afford different things, and the seminars are a nice way, a more affordable way to get the information I need, because ultimately that's what I'm sharing is information.
Right.
um, so there will be signups for these seminars. You can get my PDFs. I've been writing a book for a while, and the book gets better and better the longer I don't publish it, because
I
I keep
believe you.
learning more and more, but we're almost there. And so the book will be out soon as well.
Oh, I can't wait. Thank you so much for joining us. And thank you, everyone else, for tuning in to this, the longest episode we've ever had, unsurprisingly, of Executives Uncut. And if you enjoyed this content and what Dan had to say, please make sure to subscribe to our podcast and to his, and to share them with someone who could benefit. Don't forget to visit us at hodgescoaching.com for new episodes, or follow us at Hodges Coaching on social media. Dan, thank you again for everything. Really appreciate you joining us today.
It's always a pleasure spending time with you. We'll have to find more and more ways to do that. So I guess I'll have to come back on. If we're not catching up any other way, we'll do it this way.
You absolutely, you will. We will definitely have you back. Thank you, everyone, for viewing. I'm Sarah Hodges, and I will see you next week.